The sterile, fluorescent lights of the ICU ward hummed above me, casting long, dancing shadows across the pristine white sheets and the cold, unfeeling machinery that had become my constant companions. My breath hitched, a ragged, desperate gasp. Caught in a throat too dry to swallow, as the attending physician, a man whose face was etched with a weary blend of professionalism and pity, delivered the pronouncement. "We've done everything medically possible, Mr. Dubois. At this point, we're ready to make a ruling." A ruling. Not on my treatment plan, not on a path to recovery, but a chilling verdict on the continuation of my very existence. My hands, once strong and capable, now lay like brittle twigs on the crisp hospital blanket, too weak to clench, but in my mind, they formed desperate, shaking fists against a cruel and unjust fate. I thought this was it. I thought I was about to lose every last shred of hope, every memory, every future dream that had sustained me through weeks of agonizing decline. Then, the double doors of the ICU room swung open with a soft sigh of hydraulics, and in they walked. My in-laws, Mr. and Mrs. Albright, dressed in their customary, impeccable tailored suits and designer dresses, their faces composed in expressions of practiced solemnity that barely masked an eager glint in their eyes. Trailing slightly behind them, her head bowed in a show of appropriate grief, was my wife, Evelyn. Her face was a mask of feigned concern, a performance so convincing it might have fooled anyone else, but the cold, calculating glint in her eyes betrayed her. In her hand, clutched almost possessively, was a thick, manila envelope, one of those official-looking ones, bulging slightly with documents. For a terrifying, crystal-clear moment, a horrifying realization dawned on me, cutting through the haze of my fever and weakness like a surgeon's scalpel. They weren't here for a final, tearful farewell. They weren't here to whisper words of love or comfort. They were here for the life insurance. For the substantial payout that would be triggered by my death. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly suspect in their cold, calculating minds, was that I had seen through their meticulously planned charade. I had anticipated this moment. And I had left a letter. A damning, meticulously detailed letter, painstakingly penned in the dead of night, weeks ago, when the chilling truth of their intentions had first pierced through my illness-addled mind. It was tucked away, waiting, a silent, powerful witness to their calculated cruelty. A final, desperate cry for justice. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Caleb Dubois, and I'm 38 years old. Or rather, I was 38 before my life became this grotesque shadow play. I used to be a software engineer, a problem solver, building complex systems and dreaming of groundbreaking innovations. My days were filled with the satisfying hum of servers, the challenge of intricate code, and the intellectual thrill of bringing abstract ideas to digital life. Now, I was reduced to this, a shell of a man, a body clinging to life in a hospital bed, a helpless pawn in a macabre scheme orchestrated by the very people who should have been my closest allies, my most fervent protectors. Life before this living nightmare was, by all accounts, supposed to be the American dream personified. Evelyn and I, we were the golden couple. We'd met in our senior year of college, drawn together by shared ambitions and a seemingly boundless optimism. She was the brilliant marketing student, charismatic and effortlessly charming, and I was the quiet, determined tech whiz. We were inseparable, the envy of our friends, our future laid out like a meticulously crafted blueprint. We married soon after graduation, filled with the boundless energy of youth and the certainty of a shared destiny. Our home was a testament to our success, a spacious, modern house nestled on the tranquil outskirts of the city, complete with a sprawling, meticulously maintained garden that I, despite my deep dive into the digital world, found profound solace in tending. We spoke of children, of exotic travels, of building a legacy. My career was on an upward trajectory, Evelyn's marketing firm was booming, and our joint savings account grew steadily, a tangible representation of our hard work and shared vision. I genuinely believed she was my rock, my unwavering partner through every twist and turn life could throw at us. I truly believed we were constructing something real, something enduring, a fortress of love and mutual respect. My own parents had passed away when I was relatively young, leaving me with a modest inheritance, but more importantly, a deeply ingrained belief in the sanctity of family and unwavering loyalty. So, when I was introduced to Evelyn's parents, the formidable Mr. and Mrs. Albright, I extended my hand and my heart with genuine warmth. They were, to put it mildly, influential. With old money coursing through their veins, impeccable social connections, and a reputation for shrewd business dealings, they exuded an air of sophisticated benevolence. I, ever the eager son-in-law, tried my utmost to impress them, to prove myself worthy of their cherished daughter. For a time, I genuinely thought I had succeeded. Their initial demeanor was cordial, even warmly welcoming on occasion. Their sprawling estate was often open for lavish family dinners and meticulously planned holiday gatherings, where I, for a while, felt like a true part of their esteemed lineage, but then, as if a barely perceptible change in the atmospheric pressure, things began to shift. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly, like a discordant note hidden within a beautiful melody. The comments began. Thinly veiled critiques, artfully disguised as casual observations, about my ambition, my choice of career, my financial decisions. "Caleb, dear," Mrs. Albright would coo, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, "surely a man of your obvious potential should be aiming for something more substantial than just coding lines of digital gibberish all day?" Or Mr. Albright, with a dismissive wave of his hand, would remark, "That car of yours, Caleb, it's rather modest, wouldn't you agree? For a Dubois joining our family, one might expect something with a bit more horsepower." I initially brushed these off, attributing them to their old money sensibilities, a quaint, perhaps misguided, way of showing tough love. Evelyn, when I nervously brought these comments up, would simply offer a dismissive wave of her hand and a reassuring smile. "Oh, that's just how they are, darling. Don't worry about it. They mean well." I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. The true, devastating change, the precipitous slide into this abyss, began a little over a year ago. A cruel twist of fate, a perfect storm of relentless bad luck, descended upon me with brutal efficiency. First, a major project at work, one I had poured countless hours and intellectual capital into, went catastrophically south. It wasn't my fault entirely, but the financial repercussions for my company were staggering, ultimately leading to a significant pay cut for me and the agonizing prospect of widespread layoffs. The stress was immense, but it was just the beginning. Soon after, a sudden, debilitating illness struck without warning or mercy. It began with an overwhelming, bone-deep fatigue, a weariness that sleep couldn't touch. This was quickly followed by disorienting dizzy spells, moments where the room would spin violently, and persistent, unexplained fevers that would ebb and flow, leaving me drenched in sweat. Doctors, usually so confident in their diagnoses, were utterly baffled. They ran countless tests, blood work, scans, biopsies, but offered no definitive answers, no clear diagnosis, no path to recovery. My once boundless energy plummeted, my focus blurred to a frustrating haze, and I could no longer keep up with the demanding pace of my job. Simple tasks became monumental efforts. Eventually, with a heavy heart and no other option, I had to take an extended medical leave, my once steady income stream drying up to a mere trickle. This, I now realize with chilling clarity, was when the true, horrifying nature of my in-laws, and tragically, my wife, began to reveal itself. It started slowly, insidiously, like a creeping vine of poison. The invitations to family dinners at the Albright estate, once frequent, dwindled to almost nothing. When they did grudgingly invite us, the food served to me was conspicuously meager. Often just a few bland, boiled vegetables, while everyone else at the lavish table feasted on rich, abundant dishes. The comments from the Albrights, once subtly critical, now grew sharper, less disguised, dripping with thinly veiled contempt. "Still not feeling up to it, Caleb?" Mrs. Albright would ask, her voice a saccharine mockery of sympathy, as I struggled to lift a simple glass of water to my parched lips. "Perhaps if you tried a little harder, you'd find the strength to recover faster." Mr. Albright, ever the pragmatist, would shake his head with a sigh of mock disappointment. "A man needs to provide, Caleb. You're becoming, well, you're quite the burden on Evelyn, wouldn't you agree?" And Evelyn, my wife, my supposed partner, through sickness and health, remained chillingly silent through it all. She offered no defense, no comfort, no support. Her eyes, once brimming with warmth and affection, now held a strange, distant glint, as if she were observing a fascinating but ultimately detached scientific experiment rather than witnessing her husband's slow, agonizing demise. The refrigerator at our once vibrant home, which Evelyn managed, became increasingly bare, my once generous portions of food shrinking to almost nothing. I was too weak to prepare my own meals, too ashamed to explicitly ask for more, and honestly, too unwell to fully comprehend the insidious, slow process of starvation that was beginning to take hold of my body. I started losing weight at an alarming rate, my clothes hanging off my shrinking frame like rags. My vision blurred, my head a constant, throbbing drum of pain. The once vibrant world around me, filled with color and sound, began to fade into a dull, monochromatic haze of suffering. I was not just sick. I was being systematically withered away, piece by agonizing piece. The days bled into weeks, and then into agonizing months, each one a slow, relentless slide into deeper despair and physical degradation. My mysterious illness, still stubbornly undiagnosed and cruelly untreated, continued its relentless ravage upon my body. I became largely confined to our bed, a prisoner in my own home, too weak to do little more than shuffle to the bathroom, each step a monumental effort. The house, once a vibrant sanctuary filled with the echoes of laughter and the blueprint of our shared dreams, transformed into a silent, desolate prison, its emptiness a constant reminder of my escalating isolation. Evelyn's presence, once a given, grew increasingly scarce, a ghost in my own life. She would leave early in the mornings, the scent of her expensive perfume lingering like a cruel taunt, returning late at night, often with vague, dismissive answers about client meetings or late nights at the office. When she was home, she seemed to deliberately avoid my gaze, her attention perpetually fixed on her phone, as if the digital world held far more fascination than my rapidly fading reality. Meals, when they materialized at all, were paltry scraps. A single, dry piece of toast, a small, insipid bowl of watery broth, often left on my bedside table without a single word of warmth or encouragement. I was too weak to voice a protest, too consumed by a crushing shame to explicitly beg for more, and frankly, too overwhelmed by my illness to fully comprehend the extent of the cruel starvation that was consuming me. The hunger pangs became a constant, relentless, gnawing presence, a physical manifestation of the profound emotional and physical starvation I was enduring. I made attempts, desperate and futile, to communicate with Evelyn, to plead for help, to remind her of the sacred vows we had exchanged. "Evelyn," I'd whisper, my voice hoarse and barely audible, "I need help. I'm so incredibly sick. Can we please see another doctor? Can we just get some proper food in the house?" She would offer a vacant nod, her eyes glazed over, an unsettling blankness in her expression. "Yes, darling, soon. Just rest." But soon never came. The Albrights, my in-laws, continued their periodic visits, though their frequency had noticeably decreased. These were no longer visits of familial concern, but rather chilling inspections. They would stand at the foot of my bed, their faces devoid of any genuine warmth, their eyes scanning the room as if assessing inventory, weighing my failing existence against some unseen ledger. "Still no improvement, Caleb?" Mrs. Albright would sigh dramatically, her perfectly coiffed head shaking in a show of theatrical pity. "Such a tragedy. So much potential, simply wasted." Mr. Albright, ever the cold pragmatist, would chime in with a thinly veiled accusation, "You know, Evelyn's been under an immense amount of stress with your condition. It's really taking a considerable toll on her." Never a genuine word of concern for my suffering. Never an offer of a home-cooked meal or a referral to a top specialist, despite their seemingly limitless wealth and influence. Their indifference was a palpable presence in the room, suffocating me more than my illness. It was during one of these chilling inspections that the first, terrifying seed of suspicion began to sprout in my fever-addled mind. I was drifting in and out of a fitful, shallow sleep when I heard Mr. Albright's voice, hushed but undeniably clear, emanating from the doorway. He believed I was unconscious. "Are you absolutely certain about the policy, Evelyn? It's quite a substantial amount, after all." Evelyn's response was barely audible, a faint whisper, but I caught the chilling fragments, "All taken care of. Double indemnity clause." My weakened brain, despite its fog, struggled to process the implications of those words. Policy? Double indemnity? A profound, icy dread, far more chilling than any fever or physical pain, began to seep into my bones, a cold hand squeezing my heart. Life insurance. My life insurance. I had taken out a sizable policy years ago, naming Evelyn as the sole beneficiary, as any loving husband would. The thought had never crossed my mind since. But now, in my profoundly weakened state, hearing their hushed, conspiratorial conversation, a horrifying, undeniable truth began to reveal itself, slowly, painfully, like the drawing of a curtain on a macabre stage. They weren't just neglecting me. They were actively, patiently waiting for me to die. And, in their insidious cruelty, they were actively facilitating it through systematic starvation. The realization was a sharp, searing jolt, a brutal awakening that cut through the haze of my illness with the force of a lightning strike. It was a betrayal so profound, so utterly cold-blooded, so devoid of any shred of human decency, that it shook me to my core, stripping away every last vestige of my trust and innocence. The people I had loved, the woman I had sworn to spend my life with, her own parents who I had welcomed as my own, were deliberately letting me starve, meticulously ensuring my demise, all for a grotesque financial payout. It was nothing less than a gruesome, meticulously planned murder by neglect. That night, as Evelyn slept soundly beside me, her breathing even and untroubled, utterly oblivious to the raw terror that now gripped me, I knew, with every last fiber of my being, that I had to act. I was weak, desperately ill, and utterly Terrifyingly alone, but a surge of primal anger, a desperate, burning need for justice, for truth, coursed through my veins, pushing aside the pain. I had to expose them. I had to leave a record. I had to write that letter. With every ounce of strength I could painfully muster, I dragged my emaciated body out of bed, fumbling blindly for a pen and a crumpled piece of paper from my old desk drawer, a relic from a life that felt a million miles away. My hand trembled uncontrollably, my vision swam with black spots, but I wrote. I wrote about their deliberate neglect, about the dwindling, pathetic scraps of food they offered, about the chillingly hushed conversations I'd overheard. I wrote about the life insurance policy. I wrote about their monstrous indifference. Their calculating cruelty. It was a confession, a testament, a final, desperate cry for help from a dying man, a message in a bottle cast into the vast, indifferent ocean of my despair. I folded it carefully, my fingers aching and stiff, and with a silent, fervent prayer, I tucked it deep inside the lining of an old, rarely used jacket hanging in my closet, a place I knew, with absolute certainty, they would never think to look. It was my only weapon, my last, fragile hope. And then, all I could do was wait. For what, I wasn't entirely sure. But I knew one thing with an unwavering certainty: if I was going to die, I wouldn't go silently. My voice, though weak, would echo from the grave, and it would expose them. All the next few days were a torturous blur of intensifying weakness, punctuated by agonizing pangs of hunger and a creeping sense of inevitable demise. My body, ravaged by a combination of my mysterious illness and the deliberate starvation, was failing, each breath a struggle, each heartbeat a faint tremor. Yet, my mind, fueled by the cold fire of betrayal and a desperate need for retribution, remained agonizingly sharp, a tiny beacon of defiance in the encroaching darkness. Evelyn's absences from the house grew longer still, her excuses becoming even more flimsy, barely bothering to disguise her indifference. The Albrights called. Less and less, a subtle but chilling confirmation, I suspected, that they believed my end was truly near. They were simply waiting for the final curtain. I lay in bed, my eyes fixed on the patterns of the ceiling, listening to the agonizing silence of the house around me, a silence that screamed of abandonment and complicity. I could hear my stomach growl, a hollow, echoing sound in the profound emptiness that had taken root within me. My tongue felt like sandpaper, my throat raw and parched from chronic dehydration. Driven by a desperate, animalistic urge for sustenance, I once tried to crawl to the kitchen, dragging my emaciated body across the floor. But my legs, devoid of strength, buckled beneath me, and I collapsed, utterly spent. I lay on the cold hardwood, unable to move, my head swimming in a dizzying haze of pain and weakness. The brutal irony wasn't lost on me. I, a man who once had access to every conceivable luxury, was literally dying of starvation in my own opulent home, meticulously poisoned by the very people who had sworn to cherish and protect me. Then came the morning that broke through the oppressive monotony of my suffering. I awoke with a searing, crushing pain in my chest, a sensation unlike anything I had experienced before, as if an invisible fist was tightening around my heart. My breathing became shallow, each gasp a desperate, futile struggle for air. My heart pounded erratically, threatening to burst from my ribs, a frantic drumbeat signaling the final moments. I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that this was it. The final act of their cruel drama. I tried to call out for Evelyn, to summon help, but only a raspy, guttural whisper escaped my lips, barely audible even to myself. Moments later, I heard the faint click of the front door opening. Footsteps. But they weren't hurried or panicked. They were measured, almost leisurely, infused with a chilling sense of purpose. I heard Evelyn's voice, startlingly calm, too calm, speaking into her phone. Yes, he's quite unwell. I think it's time for him to be admitted. Yes, a medical emergency. Admitted. Not saved. Not helped. Just admitted. It was a formality, I realized with sickening clarity, a final, necessary step in their gruesome play acting, a way to make my death look legitimate, a sterile, institutional setting to distance themselves from their monstrous crime. It was about creating an alibi, a paper trail that screamed of medical intervention rather than deliberate neglect. Soon, the shrill, mournful wail of an ambulance siren grew louder, piercing the morning stillness. I remember the dizzying flash of red and blue lights outside my window, the muffled, urgent voices of the paramedics as they moved swiftly, professionally. I felt the cold, hard press of the stretcher beneath my back as they carefully maneuvered me through the hallways of my own home, the home where I was being starved to death. Even in my rapidly fading consciousness, my eyes managed to track Evelyn. She stood by the doorway, her arms crossed, her expression distant, aloof, as if observing a neighbor's minor inconvenience rather than her dying husband being wheeled away. There was no urgency in her eyes, no genuine distress, no frantic pleas for my well-being. Just that unnerving, practiced composure. As they wheeled me past the living room window, I caught a fleeting glimpse of the Albright sleek, luxury sedan. Pulling up to the curb, they emerged, their faces adopting carefully constructed expressions of solemnity, almost theatrical in their gravity. Mrs. Albright, with a delicate flourish, dabbed her eyes with a pristine lace handkerchief, though her eyes remained dry. Mr. Albright placed a hand on Evelyn's shoulder, a gesture of faux comfort and shared burden. It was a performance, I realized, for the benefit of any curious neighbors or the arriving paramedics, a meticulously constructed facade to conceal the chilling reality of their depravity. As the ambulance doors closed, plunging me into a world of disorienting sirens, flashing lights, and distant, clinical voices, I clung to one single, potent thought: the letter. My last, desperate act of defiance. My silent scream for justice. It was out there, somewhere, waiting to expose their lies. The hospital became my new, albeit temporary, prison. The sterile white walls, the incessant, monotonous beeping of machines. The hushed whispers of nurses moving like specters through the dim corridors. It was a sensory overload for my already ravaged system. Doctors bustled around my bed, their faces etched with a blend of professional concern and underlying bewilderment. My body was failing, my vital organs shutting down, yet there was no clear, conventional medical cause. They ran test after test, a relentless battery of scans, blood work, and exploratory procedures, searching frantically for an enemy they simply couldn't identify. They pumped me full of 4 fluids, concentrated nutrients, and a cocktail of medications, desperately trying to stabilize my rapidly deteriorating condition, to pull me back from the precipice. Slowly, agonizingly, I began to regain a precious sliver of consciousness, enough to observe my surreal surroundings, enough to grasp the terrifying gravity of my situation. I heard the nurses talk in hushed tones about severe malnutrition, unexplained organ failure, and cardiac irregularities. They couldn't understand how a man of my apparent background, with seemingly no history of poverty or chronic illness, could be so profoundly undernourished. They assumed some insidious, hidden disease, a rare, aggressive condition that had eluded diagnosis for too long. They never, for a moment, suspected the chilling truth of deliberate human malice. My in-laws, the Albrights, and Evelyn, my wife, became regular, unsettling fixtures in my room. Their presence, however, felt less like genuine bedside vigils and more like a macabre series of rituals. They would sit in the uncomfortable visitor chairs, sometimes for hours on end, yet their attention was rarely, if ever, genuinely on me. Evelyn, ever detached, would scroll endlessly through her phone, her thumb a blur against the screen, occasionally offering a perfunctory, almost robotic, "How are you feeling, darling?" without bothering to wait for an answer. The Albrights would engage in quiet, conspiratorial conversations, their voices low and urgent, their gazes often drifting towards the various machines monitoring my fluctuating vital signs, as if tallying up my remaining time. I would feign deep sleep, my breathing shallow and even, straining every nerve to catch snippets of their chilling dialogue. "This is taking far too long, Evelyn," Mrs. Albright would hiss one afternoon, her voice barely a whisper but laced with an undeniable edge of impatience and irritation. "The legal fees are piling up, and frankly, Caleb is becoming an expensive drain on resources. This hospitalization is costing a fortune." Mr. Albright, ever the coldly pragmatic planner, would chime in, his voice equally hushed. "The insurance company is beginning to ask questions. His prolonged hospitalization without a clear diagnosis raises red flags. We need to finalize this before they start a full-blown investigation into the claims. They're already getting suspicious about the timeline." Evelyn, usually so composed, so practiced in her feigned indifference, sounded genuinely agitated, a new crack appearing in her carefully constructed facade. "What do you want me to do, Daddy? I can't just do something to him here. The nurses are constantly coming and going, checking everything. It's impossible." Her voice was laced with a hint of desperation, a frustrated whine that revealed her complicity. My blood ran cold in my veins, despite the persistent fever that often gripped me. "Do something to him?" The words echoed in my mind, a horrifying confirmation of every chilling suspicion I'd harbored. They hadn't merely neglected me, they had deliberately, systematically orchestrated my decline. The scattered pieces of the monstrous puzzle I had been struggling to assemble began to snap into place with horrifying clarity. The sudden, debilitating illness that had baffled doctors. The rapidly dwindling food supply at home. Evelyn's sudden, inexplicable detachment. Their constant, probing questions about my life insurance, almost before I was even truly sick. It wasn't just about my failing health, or merely about the money, it was about control, about a calculated, premeditated elimination. They saw me as nothing more than a means to an end, a lucrative investment to be cashed in. I remembered Evelyn's family history, stories I'd once dismissed as tragic coincidences, an uncle who had died mysteriously in a foreign country, leaving a surprisingly large sum to the Albrights, a distant cousin whose sudden demise had also been shrouded in an inexplicable fog, and surprisingly, the Albrights had somehow benefited financially from that too. At the time, I dismissed them as isolated, unfortunate incidents, the kind of tragedies that sometimes randomly happen in large families. But now, seeing the Albrights' cold, calculating expressions, hearing Evelyn's chillingly complicit whispers, it all coalesced into a horrifying, undeniable pattern. They were predators, meticulously planning their prey's demise, and I, too, weak to fight physically, was their latest victim. I lay there, utterly helpless in my hospital bed, but a new, fiery kind of strength began to simmer within me, a burning, visceral desire for justice. I recalled the look in Maria, the kind nurse's, eyes when I had tried, so futilely, to communicate with her earlier. She was observant, empathetic, a good soul. I had to find a way to get her to understand. But first, I needed concrete proof. Something undeniable, something that would stand up in a court of law. The letter, safely tucked away in my jacket pocket at home, was crucial, but I needed to confirm it was still there, and I needed to ensure it reached the right hands. My mind, though physically exhausted and pain-racked, began to strategize. Fueled by desperation. I knew the Albrights and Evelyn would only leave my room when they felt absolutely secure in my imminent demise, or when their performance was over for the day. I had to wait for the opportune moment, a sliver of time when I could act without being detected. The stakes couldn't have been higher. My life depended on it. The opportunity, when it finally presented itself, arrived unexpectedly, a cruel twist of fate for my tormentors but a beacon of hope for me. One evening, after the last of the nurses had completed their final rounds and the hospital ward settled into its hushed, nocturnal rhythm, Evelyn received a frantic, urgent call on her phone. From what I could gather from her hushed, irritated tones, it was a sudden, critical business emergency concerning her marketing firm, something that apparently required her immediate presence at a remote location, far from the city. She spoke in clipped, annoyed whispers, promising to return as soon as humanly possible, but her frustration was palpable. The Albrights, ever protective of their carefully curated public image and unwilling to be seen as abandoning their ailing son-in-law, decided to stay behind, maintaining their somber vigil. However, the tension between them and Evelyn was thick enough to cut with a knife, a simmering resentment evident in their strained goodbyes. As Evelyn finally departed, muttering under her breath about the incredible inconvenience of it all, the Albrights settled back into their chairs, visibly annoyed and restless. Mrs. Albright pulled out a glowing tablet, immediately engrossed in some digital diversion, while Mr. Albright, exhausted by the day's charade, began to doze off, his head lolling precariously to one side. This was it. My chance. A narrow window, a desperate gamble. I had noticed that Maria, the kind, empathetic nurse, was on the night shift. She had a gentle demeanor, often dimming the harsh overhead lights and speaking in soft, reassuring tones as she conducted her rounds, checking on her patients with what felt like genuine, heartfelt care. When she entered my room, her footsteps light and almost noiseless, I knew this was my moment. I seized it. With every ounce of my remaining strength, I feigned a sudden, violent coughing fit, an intense, breathless struggle that ripped through my weakened chest. It was a dramatic, harrowing performance, and it immediately drew her to my bedside, her face etched with profound concern. As she gently adjusted my pillow, her touch cool and professional, and offered me a sip of water, her brows furrowed with worry, I knew this was my only shot. My heart pounded against my ribs, not from my illness, but from the sheer adrenaline coursing through my veins, a desperate surge of life. With a monumental effort, I reached out a trembling hand, my fingers skeletal and frail, and lightly, deliberately, tapped her arm, just enough to get her undivided attention. Her eyes, filled with a genuine, unspoken question, met mine, and I saw a flicker of startled understanding there. Then, slowly, painstakingly, I began to spell out letters in the air with my finger, tracing them above the blanket, each movement a Herculean effort that drained me. M-A-R-I-A. Her eyes widened perceptibly as she recognized her own name, a gasp catching in her throat. Then, driven by an urgent inner command, I continued, my finger now moving with a desperate, trembling urgency. H-E-L-P-M-E. Maria's expression shifted from concern to immediate, sharp alarm. She instinctively looked around the room, her gaze sweeping over the form of the sleeping Mr. Albright and the tablet-engrossed Mrs. Albright. Then, she leaned closer, her voice dropping to a hushed, urgent whisper. "Mr. Dubois, what is it? What can I do for you? Are you in pain?" I shook my head weakly, my eyes wide with an unspoken urgency, trying to convey the magnitude of my secret without uttering a sound. I needed to tell her about the letter. I needed to tell someone, anyone. But how? My body was betraying me, my voice a mere rasp, my movements agonizingly slow. I could only manage a series of weak, desperate gestures, pointing towards my chest, then vaguely towards the small closet tucked away in the corner of the room, the one where my jacket was hung. Then, with an almost imperceptible movement, I mimed the act of writing. It took several more agonizing minutes of spelling the single word, letter, and pointing, my entire being consumed by the effort, but finally, Maria's eyes lit up with sudden, profound comprehension. A letter? In your jacket, she whispered. Her voice barely audible. I nodded, a single, hopeful tear escaping the corner of my eye, a testament to the overwhelming relief that washed over me. Hidden? She pressed, her voice urgent, and I nodded again, a confirmation that sealed our desperate pact. She straightened up, her gaze hardening, a new, steely resolve settling in her posture. Maria was no fool. In her years as a nurse, she had seen countless cases of suspicious neglect, of strange family dynamics, of patients whose stories just didn't add up. My emaciated state, the inexplicable malnutrition, combined with the Albrights' cold, detached demeanor and my desperate, nonverbal attempt to communicate, painted a very clear, horrifying picture. Without another word, her movements swift and subtle, she deliberately moved towards the closet, pretending to check something on the medical equipment mounted on the wall nearby, her back shielding her actions from the Albrights. With nimble, practiced fingers, she reached into the jacket, her hand disappearing into the lining, a heartbeat of suspense. I held my breath, my entire being focused on her, my own life hanging in that fleeting moment. It felt like an eternity. Then, her hand reappeared, clutching a single, folded piece of paper, my letter. She glanced at me, a quick, almost imperceptible nod of understanding and grim determination, then, with practiced ease, slipped the letter into a secure pocket of her uniform. She then turned back to me, her face now a picture of professional calm, her expression unreadable to anyone else in the room. Rest now, Mr. Dubois, she said softly, adjusting my blanket with gentle hands. You'll be all right. We'll take care of everything. I closed my eyes, a wave of profound, overwhelming relief washing over me, as potent as any medication. The letter was safe. It was out. It was in the right hands. The game, for the Albrights and Evelyn, their monstrous charade, was about to change. Their carefully constructed house of cards was finally about to come crashing down. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The next morning, the very air in my hospital room felt charged, dramatically different from the oppressive tension of previous days. Maria, who had finished her night shift, had clearly acted swiftly and decisively. Instead of the usual hurried doctor's rounds, there was a solemn, unhurried presence by my bedside. A stern-faced hospital administrator, her expression grave and unyielding, stood alongside a police detective in plain clothes, his gaze sharp and unwavering. Maria was there too, standing quietly to the side, her face a picture of calm resolve. Her eyes meeting mine briefly, a silent reassurance. The Albrights and Evelyn were already in the room, seemingly having been intercepted before they could resume their charade. Their faces were noticeably paler than usual, their carefully constructed composure visibly cracking under the sudden, unexpected pressure. Mr. Dubois, the detective began, his voice low but carrying an undeniable weight of authority, we understand. You have something critically important to share with us. He held up a piece of paper, my crumpled letter, now carefully smoothed out, its words visible for all to see. The sight of it, clear and undeniable, sent a jolt of fierce triumph through my weakened body. The letter. It had worked. It had found its way. Evelyn, standing beside her parents, let out a sharp, choked gasp, her hand flying instinctively to her mouth as if to stifle a scream. Mrs. Albright's eyes darted frantically between the damning letter and me. A flicker of raw, unadulterated panic igniting in their depths. Mr. Albright, usually so composed, so utterly in control, looked utterly bewildered, his jaw slack, his face a mask of disbelief. They had been so arrogantly sure, so utterly convinced, that their monstrous secret was safe with a dying man, that their carefully crafted illusion of grief and concern would never be pierced. This letter, the detective continued, his gaze sweeping over Evelyn and the Albrights like a cold, analytical beam, details a horrifying account of alleged neglect, systematic starvation, and a calculated attempt to benefit from Mr. Dubois's unfortunate illness. It explicitly names you, Mrs. Dubois, and your parents, Mr. and Mrs. Albright, as being complicit in this situation. His tone left no room for doubt about the gravity of his accusation. This is outrageous. A complete fabrication. Mr. Albright sputtered, finally finding his voice, though it cracked with barely contained fury. This is nothing but the delusional ramblings of a sick man. He's clearly not in his right mind, suffering from severe fevers and disorientation. On the contrary, Mr. Albright, the hospital administrator interjected, her voice firm and unyielding. Mr. Dubois's extensive medical records corroborate much of what is stated in this letter. His severe malnutrition and organ failure are medically inexplicable given his apparent resources and lack of pre-existing conditions. There are also significant discrepancies in the visitation logs, food consumption reports, and medication administration records that raise serious questions about the care he was receiving at home. Furthermore, our preliminary review of his financial accounts reveals a disturbing pattern. While he holds a significant life insurance policy, his personal funds, once substantial, appear to have been systematically depleted over the past year through a series of unexplained withdrawals. Evelyn, finally breaking her rigid silence, tried a different tactic, one designed to evoke sympathy and discredit me. "Caleb, darling," she began, her voice thick with manufactured emotion, "why would you do this? We love you. We've been so worried sick about you. We've done everything we could." Her words were laced with a desperate, theatrical attempt at sincerity, but it was too late. I simply looked at her, my gaze unwavering, my eyes holding a silent, profound indictment of her betrayal. I offered no verbal response, allowing the truth in my eyes to speak volumes. The detective stepped forward, his presence commanding, his voice cutting through the manufactured drama like a sharp blade. "Mrs. Dubois, we've already made preliminary inquiries with your husband's life insurance provider. The policy's recent activity, specifically multiple detailed inquiries made from your household regarding the double indemnity clause and the procedures for a swift payout in the event of accidental death, is deeply concerning. We also have records of multiple large, unauthorized withdrawals from Mr. Dubois's personal accounts, transactions that appear to have been initiated by you, Mrs. Dubois, over the past several months, totaling a significant sum. These transactions occurred even as Mr. Dubois's health was in rapid decline and he was supposedly unable to manage his own finances." He held up a printout, a damning piece of electronic evidence that silenced any further protest. The Albrights' faces, once so carefully composed, turned ashen, their carefully constructed facade crumbling into dust. Evelyn looked like she was about to faint, her eyes wide with terror as the full weight of their exposure dawned on her. Their carefully constructed house of cards, built on greed and heartless deception, was finally collapsing around them, piece by agonizing piece. The detective then turned his gaze back to me, his expression softening slightly, a hint of respect entering his eyes. "Mr. Dubois, can you confirm, in your own words, that the contents of this letter are accurate and reflect your truthful account of events?" Despite my persistent weakness, a surge of raw adrenaline coursed through my veins, igniting a flicker of power I hadn't felt in months. I nodded, a slow, deliberate movement, my eyes fixed firmly on Evelyn's terrified face, then on her parents', witnessing their shattered composure. The silence that descended upon the room was absolute, deafening. It was the silence of a truth brutally exposed, a monstrous conspiracy unveiled in the harsh light of justice. The Albrights and Evelyn stared at me, no longer with feigned concern or a desperate attempt at manipulation, but with a horrifying mixture of shock, raw fear, and a burning, venomous resentment. They realized, far too late, that their victim was not as powerless or as close to the grave as they had so confidently believed. The game was irrevocably up. And against all odds, against their calculated cruelty, I had won. The immediate aftermath of that confrontation in the ICU was a whirlwind of activity and consequences. Evelyn and the Albrights, stripped of their pretense and confronted with undeniable evidence, were formally taken in for extensive questioning. The hospital staff, now fully aware of the horrifying truth of my systematic starvation, rallied around me with a renewed, almost fierce determination. My sterile room, once a cold observation chamber where I felt like a scientific specimen, miraculously transformed into a sanctuary of healing and genuine human care. Doctors, previously baffled by my mysterious decline, now had a clearer, more terrifying picture. My debilitating illness wasn't some rare, incurable disease. It was the direct, agonizing result of prolonged, deliberate starvation and malicious neglect. With proper, consistent medical attention, carefully measured nourishing food administered frequently, and a genuine environment of empathetic care, my body, though severely damaged, slowly, agonizingly, began its arduous journey back to health. The legal process, once initiated, moved with remarkable swiftness, fueled by the undeniable power of my meticulously penned letter and the overwhelming corroborating details from my medical records, my financial statements, and the subsequent testimony of hospital staff. Evelyn, confronted with the mountain of irrefutable proof, and perhaps sensing the futility of continued deception, eventually broke down. She confessed to her horrifying complicity, attempting, in a desperate bid for leniency, to blame her parents for instigating the entire monstrous scheme. However, her own active role in my starvation and the draining of my finances was too undeniable to escape culpability entirely. The Albrights, on the other hand, remained stubbornly defiant until the very end, clinging to their fabricated narrative, attempting to paint me as a delusional, ungrateful son-in-law, mentally unstable and prone to flights of fancy. But the cold, hard facts, meticulously laid out by the prosecution during the subsequent investigation, systematically dismantled their every lie, every desperate attempt at deflection. The substantial, unauthorized withdrawals from my personal accounts, their suspicious and frequent inquiries about the life insurance policy's double indemnity clause, the chilling testimony of medical professionals regarding my profound state of malnutrition, it all formed an unassailable, damning case against them. The trial, when it finally began, became a media sensation, the shocking story of the starved husband gripping the nation with its horrifying details of betrayal and greed. Evelyn, due to her eventual cooperation and the clear manipulation by her parents, received a comparatively lesser sentence. But the Albrights, the undeniable orchestrators of this grotesque plot, the architects of my slow, agonizing demise, faced the full, unyielding force of justice. They were found unequivocally guilty on charges of attempted murder and egregious financial fraud. They were sentenced to significant, lengthy prison terms, their vast, ill-gotten wealth confiscated by the state to pay for their heinous crimes and to provide restitution to me. My physical recovery was long and arduous. I had to literally learn to eat again, to consume solid food without my stomach protesting. I had to learn to walk again, my muscles atrophied from months of immobility. But even more challenging, I had to learn to trust again. The physical scars, though deep, would eventually fade, becoming faint whispers on my skin. But the emotional ones, the profound sense of betrayal, the agonizing realization of being abandoned and systematically destroyed by the very woman I had loved and the family I had welcomed with open arms, those ran deep, an indelible mark on my soul. There were countless days when despair threatened to overwhelm me, when the chilling memory of the gnawing hunger and the cold, indifferent faces of Evelyn and her parents haunted my sleep, robbing me of peace. But then, in those darkest moments, I would remember the letter. The small, defiant act that had saved my life. It became more than just a piece of paper. It became a powerful symbol of my resilience, a testament to the quiet, unyielding power of a single truth in the face of overwhelming, meticulously crafted lies. I eventually sold the house, the beautiful structure that had become my gilded prison. A place forever tainted by the memory of their cruelty. I moved to a quiet, anonymous town, seeking solace in a fresh start, far from the painful echoes of my past. I resumed my work as a software engineer, finding a profound sense of calm and control in the logic and order of code, a stark contrast to the chaotic human deceit I had endured. I meticulously, cautiously, began to rebuild my life, surrounding myself with people who were genuinely kind, who saw me for who I was, a man who had faced death and returned, not for what I had, or what I could provide, or what they could gain from me. Maria, the compassionate nurse who had found my letter and dared to believe me, became a dear, lifelong friend. She was a constant, gentle reminder that even in the darkest, most desolate corners of human experience, there are always those who will choose compassion over cruelty, truth over lies. I learned, in the crucible of my suffering, that true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts or sprawling estates or designer clothes, but in the integrity of one's character and the genuine, authentic connections we forge with others. I also learned a harsh but vital lesson about trust, that it is a fragile, precious thing that must be earned, slowly and deliberately, and that even the closest, most seemingly unbreakable bonds can be irrevocably shattered by the poison of greed and malice. But perhaps the most profound, the most transformative lesson, was about my own strength. I had faced unimaginable betrayal, endured excruciating physical and emotional pain, and stared death squarely in the face, yet I had fought back. Not with physical force, for I had none, but with the quiet, undeniable power of truth. My in-laws had let me starve, believing they could simply wait for my demise and then profit from it. They had showed up at my deathbed, their hands outstretched for the life insurance. But I had left a letter. And that letter, a whispered plea from a dying man, had spoken volumes, echoing through the halls of justice, silencing their greed and exposing their darkness to the cleansing light of truth. It had saved my life and, against all odds, given me a second chance, a chance to rebuild, to heal, and to truly live again, finally free from their shadow. Now, as I sit here, fully recovered, living a life of peace and quiet dignity, I often reflect on the chilling events that brought me to the brink. I sometimes still wake up in the middle of the night, a cold sweat clinging to my skin, worried that the entire ordeal, the starvation, the betrayal, the ICU, the legal battle, was nothing more than a terrifying nightmare. But then I feel the solid ground beneath my feet, the cool air on my face, and the quiet rhythm of my own strong heartbeat, and I exhale. I'm okay. More than okay. I'm whole. And I'm free. If you're a parent, or if you've ever fought to protect someone you deeply love, or even yourself, from an insidious betrayal, you know what this feels like. You understand the panic of feeling utterly powerless, the suffocating grip of despair when everything you cherish seems to be slipping away. But I hope you also know the fierce, unyielding fire that such a fight can ignite within you. That primal, visceral urge to survive, to seek justice, to reclaim your life. You know what it's like to be underestimated, to be dismissed, to be told you're not enough, or that your words are merely the ramblings of a troubled mind. But I hope, more than anything, that my story reminds you that your truth matters. Even when it's whispered. Even when it's questioned. Even when it feels like no one is listening. Your voice has power. Your integrity has weight. And if no one has told you today, let me tell you now, you are stronger than you think. You are more resilient than you know. And you are doing better than you believe. If this story touched you, if it resonated with something you've experienced, or if it reminded you of someone you love who is fighting their own silent battle, please, take a moment to like this video. It helps more people find these stories, and it helps us share messages of hope and resilience. Share it with someone who might need a little glimmer of hope today, someone going through a hidden struggle, or just trying to hold their world together one breath at a time. And please, leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your story. Have you ever been underestimated? How did you find your voice? What did you do when you felt powerless? How did you rise above it all? Finally, if you want more true, powerful stories like this, stories about enduring strength, unwavering love, and the transformative moments that change everything, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss what's next. Thank you for being here, for listening, for caring. From one heart that almost stopped beating, to yours.